The morning mist clung to the towering Douglas firs as Marcus stepped onto the narrow trail, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air. Something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence that made his skin crawl. Then it hit him like a freight train, the vision. Thunder cracking the sky apart, ancient trees snapping like twigs, tons of earth and rock cascading down a mountainside. He saw himself and his friends buried beneath the debris, their camping trip becoming their tomb. Marcus stumbled backward, gasping as the horrifying premonition faded, leaving only the echo of his racing heartbeat and the terrifying certainty that death was coming for them all. "We need to leave. Now." Marcus's voice cut through the peaceful morning as Sarah adjusted her camera settings and Jake sorted through their hiking gear. Sarah looked up from her telephoto lens, squinting against the filtered sunlight. "What are you talking about? We just got here yesterday." The campsite sat in a small clearing beside Willow Creek, surrounded by towering evergreens that had stood for centuries. Their orange tent looked insignificant against the massive tree trunks, and the sound of rushing water should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded Marcus of the roar he'd heard in his vision. "I saw something," Marcus said, his hands trembling as he began stuffing his sleeping bag into its compression sack. "A storm. Trees falling. We're going to die if we stay here." Jake laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Dude, you've been watching too many disaster movies. The weather forecast is clear for the next 3 days." Marcus stopped packing and stared at his best friend. "Since when have I ever been wrong about these things? Remember the bridge in Portland? The elevator in the dorm?" The laughter died on Jake's lips. Sarah set down her camera, suddenly serious. Marcus had predicted both incidents, a pedestrian bridge collapse and an elevator malfunction days before they happened. They'd learned to listen when he got that haunted look in his eyes. "What exactly did you see?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus closed his eyes, and the images flooded back. Lightning striking the ridge above us. The whole hillside coming down. Trees, rocks, mud, everything. We were trapped in the tent when it hit. He opened his eyes, focusing on Sarah's pale face. It felt so real. I could smell the rain, hear the wood splintering. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, sending dried leaves swirling around their feet. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in seconds. Jake shivered and zipped up his fleece jacket. "Okay," Sarah said finally. "If you're that sure, we pack up. No questions asked." They worked in tense silence, breaking down their carefully arranged campsite with practiced efficiency. Marcus kept glancing at the ridge above them, noting how the wind was picking up, how the previously clear sky now showed wisps of gray clouds gathering on the horizon. As they shouldered their packs and started back down the trail, Jake muttered, "This better not be one of your anxiety attacks, man." Marcus didn't respond. He could feel eyes watching them from the shadows between the trees. And every step away from the clearing felt like a small victory against something vast and patient and utterly merciless. The first rumble of distant thunder reached them just as they rounded the first bend in the trail. The parking lot at the trailhead felt like salvation until Marcus heard the weather radio crackling from an abandoned ranger station nearby. Flash flood warning for Cascade County. Severe thunderstorm watch in effect until midnight. "See?" Jake said, hefting his pack into the back of his Jeep Cherokee. "Good thing we listened to your spider sense." But Marcus wasn't relieved. The vision had been too specific, too immediate. As they drove down the winding mountain road toward the town of Millfield, he kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see a wall of debris following them. Sarah reached over from the passenger seat and squeezed his hand. "Hey, we're safe now. Whatever you saw, we avoided it." The radio crackled again. Highway 26 closure due to fallen trees. Alternate routes recommended. "That's our route," Jake said. gripping the steering wheel tighter. Good thing we're ahead of the storm. They pulled into Millfield just as the first fat raindrops began spattering the windshield. The small logging town looked like something from a postcard, with its main street lined by Victorian houses and a diner that advertised famous huckleberry pie in neon letters. "Let's grab some food and wait this out," Sarah suggested, pointing to Murphy's Diner across from the town's only gas station. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and bacon should have been comforting, but Marcus felt his unease growing. The other patrons, mostly local loggers and a few stranded travelers, kept glancing outside as the storm intensified. Lightning illuminated the mountains in stark, terrifying flashes. "You kids come down from the forest?" asked Betty, their waitress, a woman in her 60s with graying hair and worried eyes. "Smart move. Radio's been squawking about landslides up there all morning." Marcus's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. "Landslides?" "Oh yes, honey. This rain's hitting ground that's already saturated from last week's storm. Those hills are like a house of cards right now." Betty refilled his cup with steady hands, but her eyes kept darting to the windows. "You picked the right day to leave." Outside, a massive Douglas fir swayed dangerously close to the power lines. The lights in the diner flickered once, twice, then held steady. "We should get back on the road," Marcus said, standing abruptly. "Get ahead of this thing." But as they prepared to leave, Jake's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. I-5 South closed due to flooding. State Route 22 blocked by fallen trees. All eastbound routes temporarily impassable. They were trapped in Millfield, and the storm was only getting stronger. Sarah took Marcus's hand again, but this time her palm was damp with sweat. "It's just weather, right? We're miles from the forest now." Through the diner's rain-streaked windows, Marcus watched a massive pine branch crash onto a parked car, its windshield spiderwebbing instantly. The sound was exactly like the one from his vision, the sound of things breaking under impossible weight. "I don't think distance matters," he whispered. The Millfield Motel was a relic from the 1970s, with wood paneling and carpet that had seen better decades. But it was dry, and that was all that mattered as the storm raged outside their adjoining rooms. Marcus stood at the window, watching debris fly through the parking lot. A metal trash can tumbled end over end across the asphalt before slamming into a pickup truck with a sound like thunder. "The news says this is the worst storm in 20 years. Sarah called from the bathroom, where she was wringing out her rain-soaked hair with a motel towel. Jake was sprawled on one of the twin beds, scrolling through weather apps on his phone. "Looks like it'll pass by tomorrow morning. We can head home then." But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in danger. The vision had been so clear, so inevitable. How could simply leaving the forest be enough to escape what he'd seen? A knock at the door made all three of them freeze. "Housekeeping," called a voice, but it was past 10 p.m. Jake peered through the peephole. Nobody there. He opened the door cautiously, revealing an empty hallway lit by a single flickering fluorescent bulb. On the carpet lay a newspaper, soggy from the storm. The headline made Marcus's blood run cold. "Logging accident claims 3 in Cascade Forest." The article was dated tomorrow. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, reading over his shoulder. "This can't be real." But there they were in the accompanying photo, recognizable even in the grainy newspaper image. 3 bodies being carried from the wreckage of fallen trees. Their faces covered, but their clothing unmistakable. Jake snatched the paper, his engineering mind struggling with the impossibility. Newspapers don't print tomorrow's date. This is some kind of joke. Thunder crashed directly overhead, so loud it shook the building's foundations. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness illuminated only by the constant lightning outside. In the strobing light, Marcus could see something that made his heart stop. Muddy footprints leading from the door to the window, though nobody had entered the room. "We need to leave," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. Whatever's hunting us, it found us here. Sarah's camera flash suddenly went off, an automatic response to the low light. In that brief, brilliant moment, they saw a figure standing at the window tall, made of shadow and rain, with eyes like distant lightning. When the flash faded, it was gone. "Pack everything," Marcus said, grabbing his jacket with shaking hands. "We're not staying here." As they threw their belongings into their bags, the radio in the room crackled to life on its own. Severe landslide warning for Highway 26. Multiple fatalities reported. 3 victims identified as. Marcus yanked the power cord from the wall, but somehow the voice continued, listing their names with mechanical precision. Outside, the storm seemed to be calling their names in languages older than words. The Cherokee's headlights cut weak beams through the torrential rain as they fled Millfield at midnight. The windshield wipers struggled against the deluge, creating a hypnotic rhythm that matched Marcus's racing heartbeat. "Where are we even going?" Jake shouted over the storm, gripping the steering wheel as wind gusts tried to push them off the road. "Away," Marcus replied, watching the side mirror. Something was following them, not a vehicle, but a darkness that moved between the trees, keeping pace with their desperate flight. Sarah had her camera ready, taking pictures of everything. The storm, the road, their faces reflected in the windows. If something happens to us, at least there will be evidence. They'd made it 15 miles from Millfield when Jake slammed on the brakes. A massive oak tree lay across the highway, its ancient trunk blocking both lanes completely. "Damn it," Jake muttered, shifting into reverse. "We'll have to take the back roads." The way he looked in the rearview mirror, his face went white. Another tree had fallen behind them, trapping them in a 100-yard stretch of asphalt between 2 towering barricades. The radio crackled. "This is emergency broadcasting. If you can hear this message, seek immediate shelter. Do not attempt to travel." Marcus felt the familiar chill of premonition crawling up his spine. "Turn off the engine." "What? Why?" "Just do it." In the sudden silence, they could hear something moving in the forest around them. Not animals, the sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful. It was the sound of ancient wood groaning, of roots pulling free from saturated earth. Sarah's camera flashed again, and in the brief illumination, they saw trees leaning inward from both sides of the road, creating a tunnel of branches that hadn't been there moments before. "This isn't natural," she whispered. Lightning struck close enough to make their ears ring, and in its afterglow, Marcus saw the truth. The forest wasn't just following them. It was hurting them, driving them towards something specific. "The old logging road," he said suddenly, "about a mile back. We passed it right before the tree fell." Jake started the engine without question. If they backed up slowly, carefully, they might be able to squeeze past the fallen oak's root system and reach the turnoff. But as they began to reverse, the trees around them creaked and swayed, branches reaching down like gnarled fingers to scrape against the Cherokee's roof. "Faster," Sarah urged, her camera documenting everything. Each flash revealed the forest closing in, branches weaving together overhead until only a narrow corridor remained. They reached the logging road just as the last gap in the canopy sealed shut behind them. The old dirt track was barely wide enough for the Cherokee, rutted and overgrown, leading deeper into the mountains instead of towards civilization, but it was their only choice. As they bumped along the primitive road, Marcus realized with growing horror that they weren't escaping the forest at all. They were being drawn deeper into its heart. The logging road ended at an abandoned mill, its rusted machinery emerging from the rain like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast. Jay killed the engine, and they sat in silence, listening to the storm rage around them. "My phone's dead," Sarah said, though she'd had full battery an hour earlier. "Both of yours too, I bet." Marcus and Jake checked their devices, completely drained, screens black as the night surrounding them. "The mill office," Jake said. pointing to a small building that still had intact windows. "We can wait out the storm there, then hike out in the morning." But Marcus knew better. They weren't waiting anything out. The forest had brought them exactly where it wanted them. Inside the mill office, emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on water-stained walls covered with old safety posters and production schedules from 1987. The building groaned under the wind's assault, and somewhere in the darkness, water dripped with metronomic persistence. Sarah found an old radio behind the reception desk. When she turned it on, static filled the room until a voice emerged, their own voices, having the same conversation they'd had at the campsite that morning. "Turn it off," Marcus said, but the radio had no effect when Sarah pressed the buttons. Their recorded voices continued, discussing the camping trip that had brought them here, planning the hikes they'd never take. Jake discovered a logbook on the desk, its pages yellowed with age. The final entry was dated yesterday. Storm approaching. 3 hikers reported missing in Sector 7. Search suspended due to weather conditions. Machan. S. Williams J. Morrison presumed lost. How is this possible? Jake's engineer's mind reeled at the impossibility. We're not missing. We're right here. Lightning illuminated the office windows, and for a moment, Marcus could see through the glass to the campsite where they'd started this morning. The orange tent was still there, half collapsed under a fallen branch, their sleeping bags soaked and abandoned. "We never left," he realized with dawning horror. The vision wasn't a warning. It was showing us what already happened. The radio suddenly tuned to a clear station. Emergency crews have called off the search for 3 hikers missing in Cascade National Forest. The victims were apparently caught in last night's landslide while camping near Willow Creek. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. "But we're here. We're alive." Through the windows, they could see the forest moving, not swaying in the wind, but actively shifting, branches reaching and grasping, trunks leaning inward like a closing fist. "Are we?" Marcus asked. The office door slammed shut behind them with a finality that echoed through the abandoned building. Outside, the storm intensified, but now they could hear something else beneath the thunder, the sound of earth sliding, trees falling, and time itself unraveling around them. They had never escaped the forest. They had never even left their tent. And now, finally, inevitably, the landslide was coming to claim what had always belonged to it. The mill office began to dissolve around them like a photograph left in the rain. The walls became translucent, showing glimpses of their tent, their campsite, the ridge above where tons of earth waited to fall. "This isn't real," Jake said, but his voice sounded distant, echoing as if spoken from the bottom of a well. Sarah raised her camera one final time, and in the viewfinder, she saw the truth. They were still in their sleeping bags, still in the tent beside Willow Creek, while the mountain prepared to bury them. Everything else, the escape, the diner, the motel, the chase through the storm, had been the desperate dream of minds refusing to accept their fate. "The vision wasn't showing us the future," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him like cold water. "It was showing us the present, this moment, right now." The sound of cracking timber filled the air, growing louder and closer. Through the fading walls of the mill office, they could see their real bodies lying unconscious in the tent, drugged by carbon monoxide from Jake's poorly ventilated camping stove. "We never woke up," Sarah whispered. "The whole day was a dying dream," Marcus finished. The landslide began with a sound like the world breaking. Ancient trees that had weathered countless storms finally surrendered to gravity and time. The ridge above their campsite gave way in a thunderous avalanche of stone and soil and splintered wood. In their final moment of awareness, as the office dissolved completely and reality reasserted itself, Marcus felt something unexpected: peace. They had run from death across an entire day that existed only in the space between heartbeats, and in the end, the forest had shown them kindness, letting them believe they could escape. letting them say goodbye without knowing it. The darkness came gently, like sleep after a long and terrible dream. When the rescue teams finally reached the campsite 3 days later, they found the tent almost perfectly preserved beneath the landslide, as if the earth had tried to protect what it had claimed. The three friends lay together, their expressions peaceful, their hands still clasped from their final moments of shared dreaming. The investigation ruled it a tragic accident, carbon monoxide poisoning followed by the landslide that had buried them before they could wake. The camping stove had malfunctioned, they concluded, a simple mechanical failure that had stolen 3 young lives. But the lead investigator, a veteran of mountain rescues, couldn't explain the photographs found in Sarah's camera. Images of them running through storms that hadn't happened, staying in motels that didn't exist, fleeing down roads that led nowhere. The final photo showed the 3 of them standing at the mill office, looking directly into the camera with expressions of terrible understanding. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows, stood the forest itself, patient, eternal, and satisfied.